Cool. So, welcome. It looks like everyone has sent their note takers to the event. So it looks like How, you're the only person who's actually here live. So welcome, How. We are recording it, so we'll be sharing it tomorrow in our newsletter. So hopefully we'll have a few more people seeing this tomorrow. But today we are doing a workshop. We're lucky enough to be joined by Shane Hoffman. Shane runs Flex Limit Solutions, which is an agency specializing in streamlining operations for companies using automation tools and other local tools, particularly Airtable. Shane was previously Vice President and Global Head of Video and Podcast Operations at Condé Nast, which is one of the largest media companies in the world. But today we're looking at what Airtable can and can't do for both internal operations and user data, user-facing front ends. And then we'll also look at where Airtable is headed as a product and business. So I'm going to pass over to Shane. If there are any questions during the chat, you can drop them in the chat, and I'll pick those up either at the end or raise them with Shane as we go. All right, Shane, over to you.
Thank you, Josh, for inviting me to do this workshop, and it's really exciting to speak to all of you, and welcome to everyone. I know it's, especially in Beijing, this is, I think, already pretty late at night, so I appreciate you joining. And if at any point you can't hear me, please let me know so that I can adjust my speaker settings or something else. I wanted to start out by saying that you all, being no-code founders, probably have found use cases and limitations of Airtable that I'm not even familiar with, because I largely focus on internal applications for Airtable. And that is, in fact, what Airtable is generally used for. In fact, Airtable just had its first ever interface design contest. I'm going to show it in a little bit. But all of the use cases that they chose to highlight in awarding people who had built great interfaces were internal applications. That's not to say that it can't be incredibly useful for no-code founders like yourself for internal operations as you scale to populate MVP and proof of concept apps like Bubble, and also to rapidly prototype. So I'm just going to share my screen. It says you cannot start screen sharing while the other participant is sharing. I don't see anyone else sharing.
I think that was me with the music. You should be fine now.
Right. All right. So just a quick agenda. I want to talk about what you'll get out of this, who I am, what Airtable can and can't do for no-code founders, where Airtable fits within the no-code space, the state of Airtable as a product and as a business. Those are somewhat intertwined, but a little bit different, and upcoming Airtable features, and also some features that frustratingly maybe are not upcoming, which can help you determine whether Airtable is a good or not a good solution for something you think you need or will want in the future. So what we get out of this, well, first of all, what is your experience with Airtable? I know Josh threw a poll up there. Josh, did we get more than one response?
At that time, there's only one person in the call. There's a few more people in there now. So maybe if we say in the chat what your experience is,
yeah.
If you're like beginner, intermediate, expert.
All right, so yeah, if you want to just throw in the chat your level of experience with Airtable, that would be amazing. See that intermediate for Josh. I would call intermediate for Haoquan. Beginner, intermediate for Christy. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. I would consider myself an expert, but for internal applications. For external user-facing applications or applications in the entrepreneurial no-code founder space, probably somewhere in the intermediate level, again, because that's not what I focus on, although certainly for features, I'm quite familiar with what Airtable has going on. We'll talk about an understanding of where Airtable is headed as a business and a product, how Airtable can improve internal operations, and how Airtable can be used to build a proof of concept, but not an MVP, specifically for certain features, and where your needs are better served by competitors in the no-code space, and there are many. So just a little fine print. The perspectives of where Airtable is headed as a business and what new features are to be added are personal opinion. The views expressed are mine alone. You cannot take this to be related to my work with my clients, nor should you assume that the information I'm sharing on upcoming features were gleaned from Airtable itself or anyone who currently works at Airtable. These are informed opinions based on many conversations with many, many people across the space. It cannot be used for investment purposes. So in the off chance that you were thinking of investing in Airtable in its next round, which I don't think it will need, this cannot serve as information for that. Very unlikely, I know. First, I wanted to tell you who I am, and I don't need to screen share for this. So Josh gave me a bit of an introduction. My name is Shane Hoffman. I have been building no-code tools before I think it really had a name. I started that at HBO, Home Box Office, which is a United States media company, 17 years ago, where I built Excel documents that handled our nonlinear streaming services. These were very nascent early streaming services, and we needed a way to capture the programming, what rights we had in the given territory we were distributing across the world. And we wanted a way to quickly prototype schedules for how content would be rolled out. And I built a tool that managed that. I left HBO and went to Condé Nast, which is a global media company. Used to be magazines, now it's mostly digital, web, video. When I started, they needed a way to capture the on-air schedule, what videos were going to be distributed on what platforms, YouTube, they owned and operated websites, and they needed to start collecting metadata about those videos and manage the process to ensure that everyone was on the same page. And I started leveraging first Google Sheets, then Zapier, and then eventually my main love, Airtable, within my first year there. And I've been building heavily with Airtable for now close to a decade. In April, I made the difficult decision to leave Condé Nast and the media industry in general to focus on Airtable. It was clear that in order to spend my time building with no-code tools, I would never have a role like that at my level. And I left Condé Nast as a pretty senior person if I was to stay. And I wanted to focus on no-code tools like Zapier, like Airtable, mini extensions, Softer, et cetera. And so I started my business, which is called currently Flex Summit Solutions, although I think I'm going to change the name. I have one large client, which is a US-based media company. It's not Condé Nast. I can't reveal the name, unfortunately. And I have a couple smaller clients, but the large client takes up the bulk of my time. And I'm excited to talk about Airtable because I think it is the most important no-code tool out there. I would say Bubble is a close second, followed by Zapier. I'm not an expert in Bubble. I am an expert in Zapier, but across the entire space, having nothing to do with the founder space, I think Airtable is the most relevant. Let me share my screen again. And by the way, if you have any questions as we go along, put them in the chat. Josh will be watching the chat. And if the question needs to be answered immediately, if it's something related to what we're doing, what we're talking about, he'll pipe up and let me know. Otherwise, we'll save it for the end. So what can Airtable do? It can serve as CRM, CMS, task management, project management, etc., all in one. And this is where Airtable really shines relative to other tools that are marketing themselves as all-encompassing solutions, but are really not. So I'm going to point the finger at tools like Monday.com and ClickUp, which serve, and Salesforce, which serve particular functions and and have built feature additions that accommodate additional areas of development for internal applications. But really the foundation is in task management, project management, or CRM. The value of Airtable comes from the fact that because it's a blank sandbox relational database, you can build any one of these types of features in the way that you need and even have them interrelated. So I have rarely seen a situation where a CMS and a task management within Airtable are truly separate. They're one and the same. They're related. Project management as well. More importantly, everyone's usage of CRM, CMS, et cetera, is idiosyncratic. Everyone has particular use cases. So for example, ClickUp has a way of working. And if you can get your entire team on that one way of working, then a tool like ClickUp or Salesforce is amazing for you. Yes, they have customization, but they have a perspective on how you are to work. Airtable is not that way, which can be frustrating for people who are looking to get working fast. Airtable is not a get working fast solution when you start getting fairly complex. Airtable can be used independently by junior employees to enrich internal operations. So I think this is probably one of the most key bullets for this, for you all. I assume, I might be wrong here, that a lot of you are either working independently, since you are no-code founders, or working with a small team. But I assume that as you begin to grow, you will need to hire, and those new hires will be tasked with solving problems. And Airtable is excellent at allowing junior employees working independently to solve problems by hooking up new tables or new views to existing data, or starting to collect new data and connecting it to an external database. So it can be a way to kind of port some of your business's needs to a new employee so that they can work independently. It can accommodate non-standard internal data structures. So I spoke about this as it relates to CRM, but everyone works weird. Everyone works differently. And what Airtable is really good at is allowing you to completely sculpt a solution for your needs. It can populate MVPs in Bubble, Glide, et cetera, with kind of user data that you're populating with, or external user data if you have a way of ingesting that. And it can serve as a rapid prototyping sandbox for new features. So if you were thinking about a new feature and you want to quickly play with how the data could work within an interface, how everything is related on the back end, it can do that. I'm going to get into where that functionality leaves you, because it's not comprehensive. It's not something you were going to show to a funder or an external user. Let's see, do we have any? Never mind. All right, so moving on to what Airtable cannot do. Airtable cannot serve as an MVP or funder-oriented proof of concept. So there is nothing in Airtable that is baked enough from a UI perspective that you would show it to a funder as a proof of concept, nor does it have a user-facing function set that is robust enough and has complex permissions enough at this point that you could really launch it as an MVP. So that is a limitation for people in your space. It cannot handle very large data sets. So this is when I lose business, and I've lost some pitches of recent, and this is something I brought up to Airtable, it's because Airtable cannot handle data sets over roughly 150,000 records per base. So by records, I mean rows or just data points. Now, that is not a hard and fast rule. It depends on how many attributes to those records you have. But some of the clients I've pitched, potential clients, have needed 100 attributes on average per record. And so when you multiply that out, it gets to a large data set that is so unwieldy that the site crashes or loads so slowly that you just hate using it. And so that's something to keep in mind. For example, at Condé Nast, we would have loved to use Airtable to manage all the cues, all the music all the in and out points for all the music we used in our digital videos. But there were sometimes 400 of these in and out points for the music we used in our videos. And if you publish 4,000 videos with 3 versions of each video a year, you're very quickly going to blow through a data set. And you're going to have to archive to an outside base or do something complex like that. So that's something to keep in mind. Manage all automations or workflow needs. So Zapier, Make, Workato, still way better for automation. Airtable has an automation function that launched, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, but it's really fairly limited. It has webhooks, so you can write your own scripts and build your own integrations. But for really complex stuff and to really troubleshoot issues, tools like Zapier are still way better. And it can't be user-facing, external user-facing, with exceptions. Because of its cost structure and because it doesn't have white label, it's really not for user-facing data outside of your company. Now, where does Airtable fit within the no-code tool space? I think if I had to guess, most of you are familiar with at least half of these on here. And you're probably way more familiar with them than I am, because a lot of them are related to the founder space, payments, web apps. This is kind of where I function out of, database and automations. Airtable, I would generally agree with this structure. This is one diagram of many that I've seen. Yes, Airtable is fundamentally a database tool. It has gotten into automations and it has gotten into web apps with its interfaces functionality, but those automations are very limited and the web apps are internal using at the moment. But the way I like to describe the difference between Airtable and other tools is what I call the skyscraper analogy. And please, this is Frankfurt clay, whatever that means, is not relevant to this. This is just something I grabbed off the web. But with Airtable, the foundation of the structure that you will build with is blank space. When you are building out the database in Airtable, you are starting from scratch. Airtable has no perspective as a product as to how you are going to relate the data, what attributes you're going to use, what lookup functionality or formulas you're going to use. And so the skyscraper that gets built over your foundation can be built in any way you want from a UI perspective. That UI can look and function however you need because the foundation is so malleable, so flexible. And there's no perspective in it. Whereas tools like Salesforce and ClickUp, and to some degree Notion, although I think Notion is moving in the right direction, the foundation is either CRM or project management or CMS. And as a result, you can only build a certain type of skyscraper. A lot of times they'll have a part of that skyscraper that is optimized for an additional function type, but the foundation still being one of them, CRM, et cetera, limits you. And people work weird. So there is very little value from my perspective in going down one of these routes. More importantly, if you are going to pay for seats, and Airtable is not cheap, and neither are some of its competitors, you might as well pay for a solution that allows you to use it for all types of functions. Whereas if you buy ClickUp, that's task management or project management, that's going to be a little bit more limited. But Airtable can be used for whatever you need it to use for internal purposes. So where is Airtable as a business and product headed? Well, most importantly, it's transitioning business models. So whereas before it was aimed at taking advantage of people at a junior level, discovering it because it was quote unquote fancy Google Sheets, and then socializing it within their businesses to the degree that Airtable could leverage just this incredibly saturated seat count within a company, that's no longer what they are aiming for. They are aiming for a business model where they are signing large enterprise deals with decision makers. And along with that, they're launching a partner developer program. Salesforce is kind of the gold standard of this, where they have huge agencies outside the walls of Salesforce who are blessed by Salesforce, and Salesforce even recommends them to new customers and existing customers. Airtable is going to be doing the same thing. They're at the very early stages, but they've hired people who have done this at large SaaS companies to launch this partner developer program. Obviously, I hope to become a partner developer as well. They're leaning into interfaces. So I'll talk a little bit about interfaces in a moment, but interfaces are the UI for Airtable. And you might ask yourself, wait a second, what? Airtable, of course, has a UI. Well, it does and it doesn't. The relational database was so easy to use that it allowed Airtable to get along without, for many years, without an actual user-facing of its function set. For example, I never shared any Airtable data with an executive before I was an executive because they'd never look at it, because it was just a database. As pretty as the database was, you'd never share it with an executive. Now with interfaces, you could potentially share information with an executive and have them click around and learn things about the information in it if you were working at a large company. But also, I think they're looking towards a future where interfaces are going to be used as the primary way for internal teams to share and enter and collaborate on information. And the database will become something that's truly behind the scenes. And they're marketing to decision makers, not end users. So if you have been at an airport in the US recently, I guarantee you have seen an Airtable ad. This is new and this is very telling. Airtable is aiming their marketing at decision makers at companies who will never use Airtable directly, almost certainly, and not at the individual user. That was all word of mouth. People discovered Airtable by word of mouth. That was how Airtable got in the door of companies. I think they've reached a saturation point out there, and they're reaching out towards executives in the procurement and technology space. So what are some upcoming new features of Airtable? Again, I just want to reiterate, this is a matter of personal opinion. You cannot take this to be the opinion or knowledge from any of my clients or from Airtable itself. Two-way base sync. So this is in beta. You can sync between two bases. And I know I talked about the fact that, that bases were somewhat limited in the number of records, and that once you got past a certain number of records of data and a certain number of attributes per record, it would slow down. So this is a way around it. It is also a way around the fact that Airtable at the moment does not have great permissions. So you could cordon off some of your data for an internal user to a different base and merely sync, but now also sync back with certain attributes of each record. It's not perfect and it's not a solution for everybody. It's instantaneous in one direction and not instantaneous in the other direction. Having used it, I can say that I'm not sure they've settled on what the polling period is going to be because it does seem to change. If I had to guess, it'll be somewhere between 20 seconds and 2 minutes. I know that's very broad, but there is potential for overwrite, data overwrite, which I would be concerned about. There are going to be major interfaces improvements. So up till a year ago, every improvement made to Airtable was either on the database functionality or the automations. Going forward, the database, I think, is pretty much exactly where they want it. And all the new improvements are going to be coming to the interface functionality where you're able to leverage that data from the database and present it in a way that's actually visually appealing. Granular permissions. So this is in beta as well for interfaces, but you can share an interface and not the underlying base data. That's huge. With my large client that I'm working with now, within the company, because there's so many users that you don't want digging around in data and accidentally entering it, even if you want them to edit information in the interface. And interfaces allow you to give them the permission effectively to manage certain data points, but not others, and to view it in a way that gives them a sense of where this fits within their work, as opposed to just this unending database that just goes on and on and on and on. More integrations for automation. So right now it integrates with like 20 different external tools. I expect that to grow. Long term, this is one I don't know quite what to make of this, but they are going to allow, I believe, live external data sources. So today you can bring in data to Airtable one time. You can sync it in, and there is some live sync from like Google Sheets and Excel and any CSV. You can bring in data from calendars and things like that. But it's possible, I think that they will allow external data sources from tools like Firebase. I don't know if any of you have used Firebase or databases like that to underlie the interfaces. So I think that I think that's going to happen. I think that won't happen for years, but it is something they're looking at. A revised fee and seat structure. So this is pretty relevant for people like me as I'm talking to new clients. I believe that they are going to charge read-only collaborators at a much, 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 much lower rate. So I think this is towards the potential of one day allowing white label external usage, where you are able to put white label versions of the Airtable experience outside the gate and maybe pay a fee per user. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but at the very least for internal, if you have read-only users, you're going to pay a fraction of what you pay for editors and owners. Partner developer accounts. So for people like me, this is not super relevant to you. I will, when I become a partner, hopefully have a free account so that when somebody hires me, they don't pay for my seat. Free engagements for enterprise users with partner developers. So when you sign on as an enterprise user of Airtable, you will get a free number of hours with an approved partner developer. I don't know how relevant that is to you, but that's a big change, and that's something Salesforce does as well. What's not coming, and this is potentially as important, improve base performance and base size. So Airtable has pretty much maxed out, given the client side weight of loading a base and all the data. I think base performance and base size are pretty much capped at where they are for a very long time. Now, you can get around that in a way with bidirectional sync. You can get around that a bit with interfaces. But again, for large data sets, you're not going to be using Airtable anytime soon. External white label interfaces. I wish this was coming, but I just don't see it anytime soon. Maybe I think they're heading towards that in the future, but it's not on the horizon. And direct competition with Zapier, Bubble, et cetera. They are not trying to be a replacement for Zapier as it relates to automation and workflow, or Make for that matter. Nor are they trying to replace Bubble or Glide or tools like that for MVPs and proof of concepts. They just don't see that as their strength. I did want to show a couple things on my browser. I wanted to show, if you aren't familiar with interfaces, we can send this out after the meeting, but these are the winners of the interface design contest that Airtable had. And I think it's very telling what they picked as the winners. So people like me who work in Airtable submitted interfaces off of bases, and Airtable picked some winners. They're mostly for people to manage information about their personal life or about their organization or a decision that they're making. It's not enterprise. So my wardrobe, okay, very personal. Lesson planning, quite personal. You can share that with the shared link, a public shared link with your class, but this is largely internal and personal. Dream home finding, very personal, but look at all the beautiful detail that's provided. Best use case solution, office hours command center. So allowing people to schedule time, I guess, with a user. Legal nonprofit database. That's for a client of AirOps Consulting. That's internal. This dashboard, wildcard, mountain rescue help desk. I don't think this is actually functional, but the idea is that you could run a mountain rescue help desk from Airtable. But the most important thing is that these are internal, and that's very telling. I also wanted to point you all towards templates in Airtable. You really can't go wrong by clicking into these and leveraging some of the pre-existing bases and either tacking that data onto your existing base or building off of them. There is no reason you have to start from scratch. I will add the caveat that it does kind of box you into a perspective, and I like to build from scratch, but there's so many great templates out there that you can start with if you haven't already. That is all I have. I can show some functionality in Airtable. I can certainly show some interfaces and show how I would build an interface, as I know that that might not be some functionality that you all are terribly familiar with. But I wanted to open the floor to all of you for questions, comments, discussion.
Thank you, Shane. That was amazing. I've got a couple of questions myself, but I'd like to see if anyone else has any first. So how, Justin, why choose Airtable over Notion? That's a great question. I think that's probably a very popular question.
Yeah. So I have a harder and harder time answering that question specifically because Notion has added a lot of really great database functionality. I don't have a good answer. Notion, I'm not a power user of Notion by any stretch. I think Notion is a valid competitor to Airtable, and I don't. And that's a blank hole in this presentation. I do not know enough about Notion to compare it. I tried using it 2 years ago and found it too focused on front end and user-facing information and not enough on the underlying data, but I know that they've added a lot of database functionality. And I personally prefer SaaS tools, no-code tools that focus first on the data underpinning the application, but I know Notion is moving in that direction and has.
Yeah, Paul is saying, could you show some killer apps you've built for internal apps, especially for use cases not met by Airtable solution, CRM?
This is odd, but I can't. I can't show you things I built for clients. That is, all of my clients have put me under fairly strict NDAs. So I cannot share things I have built, but yeah, unfortunately, I can share some after this meeting. I can share some links. I'll white label some stuff and strip out any information, and I can send those out. But I'm sorry, I don't have anything that I can share right
sorry,
now.
Shane.
How do you have any? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if Howard Kwan is your first name, but can you give me an example of something that you would be looking to solve or looking to use Airtable for, and I can talk through it?
Yeah. So sorry, this might be confusing because I'm not asking for a demonstration of the specific applications that you've built. I'm not interested in like the sensitive information, but I'm more curious to see like what kind of use cases that you're solving for customers, because I'm also trying to build some no-code tools that's for building internal applications. So I'm just collecting some information, getting others' feedback about what they would use for internal applications, internal use cases, and those demands cannot be met by out-of-box solutions like CRM.
Right.
So if you could just talk about some use cases in the past that, like you said, people work weird. Everybody has probably different use cases, but it would be great to hear what you've helped customers build.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. So I'll share an example of one of the most exciting things for me to build was an extension of some functionality that I added to a base at Condé Nast, the media company I worked, that allowed decision makers to see how effective producers were. These are people who produce the videos, at using their time and getting views on their videos. So what it did was we used mini extensions as, I don't know if any of you have used mini extensions, but it plugs into Airtable. It allows you to create forms. Probably today I would just use interfaces, but it was a way of saving on headcount at the time. So we gave the user the ability to record the hours spent on tasks and different types of tasks. And within the base, we were able to assign a dollar value to their time. So a producer, an associate producer, their time was worth so many dollars an hour, producer and executive producer, so many dollars an hour. And so we're able to calculate how much time they spent, not just on each video, but each task within a video. And then simultaneously, we had information coming in from an external data source, well, from an internal at Condé Nast data source, but external to Airtable over a custom integration. It pulled in information on the success metrics of the video, views and revenue. It pulled in revenue. And so we were able to compare the cost, the producer cost, against the revenue. So that gives you ROI. And it gave you the ROI for each producer. So that this producer spent this amount of time and the revenue for that video was this. Now, the problem with it was that some producers, they were junior enough or just unfortunate enough that they kept getting assigned to shitty videos, videos that were not going to perform as well as this producer who was just always getting thrown at videos that were going to have a big celebrity in them or just were always going to succeed because they're on a more successful YouTube channel. So at the time, Bon Appetit was one of our most successful YouTube channels. You couldn't go wrong. And so if a producer was going to be assigned to that, their ROI was always going to look great. And so what we were able to do was get more granular and compare the average for the series, because these were all within a creative series, the average of the series for ROI against the ROI of that individual producer for that series. And the delta between that average across all videos produced and that producer's contributions to particular videos showed whether they outperformed or underperformed the average. And that was probably one of the most powerful things I've ever built because it gave Condé Nast an understanding of who was pulling their weight and who was not.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some other examples that were truly unusual. I mean, task management and project management is always going to be unusual. I'm trying to think of some odd things I built for them. I'll think about it. Let's go to another question. I'm sure I'll come up with another example.
With those kind of examples, from an agency perspective, would a client come to you with that problem and then you're working out the solution of how to do that? Or are they coming to you with a very specific script of exactly what they want built?
Yeah. So what I have found is that the person who is hiring me is often not the person who has the problem. And so the person who's hiring me is expressing their understanding of what is broken or could be improved. And they're speaking about it at a very high level. when I speak to the actual users, they are speaking about it from a day-to-day pain point perspective. And those often don't align. And I have to spend time making sure that both the decision maker who's hiring me and the day-to-day on-the-ground users fundamentally understand what the solution is going to be and what the benefits are going to be. So I end up spending a ton of time like playing marriage counselor between these two different parts of the business. Oftentimes, the on-the-ground users have no perspective on what the ultimate solution could be. The business, the person who's hiring me generally has a more sophisticated opinion about where this could go, but they often approach it with a one-size-fits-all perspective of, oh, it should be CRM, or it should be this, or it's the CMS, and just build us a CMS, build us the CRM. And so bridging that divide is a real challenge. Of the clients I have now, none of them have come to me with a build this, like a list of things they wanted me to build. It was always like, this is what sucks about the way we work. Can you help us fix it? Put together a proposal. I put together a proposal. Invariably, they don't understand it. I've had that challenge where even when I focus on the benefits, when I focus too much on what it's going to look like and how it's going to operate, they want to understand the benefits. And when I focus on the benefits, they want to understand how it will work. I've never found that sweet spot where everyone walks away and says, I get it. So that's a challenge. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. So just curious about that. Does anyone else have any questions? I do have one more, but I'll see if anyone else has one before we wrap up. No one else? Okay, cool. So I was just curious. So my use case of Airtable is basically like a glorified spreadsheet. I put data in there. The main feature I'm using is like the grouping feature to group data off into buckets. And I suspect there's probably a lot of people in the same boat, and I wonder what's the way to upskill from there in Airtable? Like,
do you have multiple tables?
Yeah, I have multiple tables with some linked tables as well. So using some of the features available, but really just using it as kind of a spreadsheet for tracking.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there are multiple steps of taking advantage of Airtable. Right? Most people get in, it's fancy Google Sheets. They like the way it groups. They like the way it presents multiple views in a way that Google Sheets and Excel suck at. And so they start there. Then the next step is creating new tables that allow one-to-many or one-to-one relationships between those tables. Oftentimes I see tables disconnected from any other table. If you have a table that is holding data in an Airtable base that's not related to any other table, then you're misusing Airtable, and that table should be deleted. It's better kept in Google Sheets. It's a matter of personal opinion, and it's a thing I care way too much about. But they relate the data. You're able to look up information, write formulas that summarize or break down information, roll up fields that do the same. Those are really powerful. The next step, I would say, is pulling in information from outside data sources or pushing information to outside data sources. So, I used to use Zapier very heavily at Condé Nast. I use Make. Those are really great tools for pulling in information from, for example, YouTube, or from an outside invoicing tool, or from an internal database where you could write a webhook. Thank you, Justin. And I think that's the next step. The next step after that is using interfaces. And I don't know how many people you work with directly, Josh, but it might be that you want to start enforcing workflow. And that's one thing that Airtable really failed at until it got into interfaces, was any sense of workflow process. Like, it was just this unending database, and you couldn't enforce movement of information or a sense of where you were within the process for a user at any given time. And with interfaces, now allowing a user to navigate between interfaces or be directed to a different interface, and I hope to do a video on LinkedIn about this soon, be directed to a different interface depending on the status of something going on in the base, you can effectively enforce and communicate the process. And I think that that's really relevant for companies looking to scale and bring on junior employees, because I can tell you, having done this for close to a decade, that dropping a new user into an Airtable database, especially one with more than a few tables and more than a few thousand records, is going to overwhelm them more than it is going to give them information. And I think that's one place I've failed before interfaces. Was I never had a good solution for how to onboard new users. But with interfaces, onboarding becomes a lot less onerous.
Really interesting. Okay, no, thank you. That's really, really useful information. So thanks for that. So yeah, so if there are no more questions, then we can leave it there. Thank you. Thanks so much, Shane, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, say that again.
You go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And if you have any questions or follow-up questions, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to talk to Airtable. I'm a total nerd for this stuff. So, thank you, Josh, for dropping my LinkedIn there. So yeah, love talking to Airtable. Put me in touch with people. Happy to have conversations. And yeah, just excited to talk to this community. So thank you all.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.